Welcome to A Matter of the Mind, Project Connection. I'm Mark Perry, and today we're going to delve into territory that is familiar for us, but will have a twist. I just thought that sounded good to say at the top here. I don't really know if that's exactly the way to describe this, but it feels right. Okay. So, I've just been speaking with my guest a little about the nature and intention of this program, especially since the beginning of last year, about cultivating connected culture on every level of humanity that we can. That just, to me, is a most fundamental territory that can help serve whatever we may think of as problematic in terms of humanity on the planet. And I'm also, as a sometimes performing musician and as a great appreciator and of art and artists and creativity, and I've had many clients in that area, and I think my clients and students who are those types really taught me that we're all that type. Some just, make it more prominent in how they do their life and what they express into the world, and have really connected me in or helped me to see more clearly how powerful creative intelligence is in direct access. And meaning that to talk about it, to conceptualize about it, to access, what's symbolic around all of that is all what we do as humans. This is all wonderful. But there's something about all of that really, in most direct experience, is mysterious and powerful and gives us access to ways of viewing things and choosing about things that our strictly analytical, intellectual intelligence doesn't really have the capacity for, and even, shall we say, the more superficial aspects of what people talk about as practicing art isn't necessarily accessing. And talking about it is a limited access as well, and yet this program is intended to be a facilitator, a medium, an access around all of that. And of course, all who are listening in are perhaps even a more essential element than who we are sitting here in a studio talking to each other. So I invite you in once again to join me with my guest, Lili Pierrepont, who is a collector, an entrepreneur, and she's the executive director of ArtBridge, which is a 501c3 where the mission of that organization is to create innovative and interactive projects that support, foster, and encourage life-enhancing engagement with the arts, not just in New Mexico, but far beyond its borders. And there's a lot more to Lili than that brief part of the introduction, but we'll let that emerge as we go along. Welcome, Lili, to Excellent. A Matter of the Mind, Project Connection.
I'm so glad to be here. And it's so great that your description of why you created this program and how you got started and why you invited me is so appropriate, because the way we met is we just started to build connection at an event. We were both there to witness an art event, a speaker, and you sat next to me, an amazing speaker, Rose Simpson.
Yes.
And I was there because I particularly want to get her on my show, and I wanted to really feel firsthand what she was all about, get her vibe. And you sat right next to me, and we started a conversation. So the connection began immediately.
Yes.
I was already in connection mode because I was hoping to connect to her. And the whole purpose the reason I created ArtBridge, and the name of ArtBridge is literally bridge, to connect people who are not as knowledgeable about the arts with the arts, to help sort of demystify this thing that we call the arts, and what is it, and who are these people who engage with it every day, and how do they stare down a blank canvas, and what are they up to that's so different from what we regular folks are up to in our day-to-day work. So it was that curiosity that led me to the Rose Simpson event, that led me to you, and that leads us to here. So
yeah, and part of what was very powerful for me in moving in, because I confess I was not as familiar with Rose and her mother as I realized afterwards. I'm like, oh my God, I was not paying attention to a certain really important area of art in general, of indigenously sourced art, and of what's local to me in my community that I've been in for so many years. And, she's, especially from my point of view, those of us who weren't born yesterday, someone like Rose who was relatively young and yet so articulate, and I mean by that more than just the capacity to access language and communicate something, is that she had an access to articulate themes and intentions about what she's creating and what she's putting out in the world and inviting people into, that had great depth, had symbology that was so woven in and from her culture, and so powerfully effective and her portfolio is vast, especially for someone of her age. And it just really powerfully struck me. That's exactly what we're talking about, is what's available when we're drawing on, she's not just thinking about, well, here's a sculpture, she works with clay a lot, and she's working with ceramic, but the themes and the symbols and the size even of what she creates is so powerful. And she described it, okay, I couldn't do this without my team.
That's what I talk about connection. One of the things that I absolutely love is that she pretty much personifies one of the things that's become a common theme to the conversations I've been having with artists, which is they tap into the field, a source. Mm-hmm. And in her case, it's a field that includes her heritage. She talked about her mother, she talked about her father, she talked about her grandmother and her aunts.
Yes.
And this incredible lineage, which is, of course, what we have come to learn about Native culture, is they are very mindful of who they are sourced from, and where, and the earth and the sky and the stars. And she integrates all that into her work and spoke about it so powerfully, but without leaving anybody out.
Yes.
And that's what I thought was
Yes.
so inclusive about the way she spoke. I happened to feel, I left that presentation feeling, I have to say, a little bit, sort of white and fragile.
Yes.
Because her power for such a young woman was so mind-blowing. And I had the opportunity to speak to her afterwards. And all I could say was I felt like, blah, blah. You're such a rock star. I mean, and she really is. I mean, it's no surprise that she's in the Whitney Biennale. It's no surprise that she's been appointed to be on the board of IAI, board of directors or whatever. But when I see and connect with that kind of presence, I know I'm in a life-giving situation. It's just so incredible to be able to engage with people like that. And especially when you get them talking about the thing that they care most about, they're like plugged into the socket and it just comes right through them. And you can't not be changed when you interact with somebody like that.
Yes.
And that's really what I think you and I share that intention of bringing conversations like that, or getting curious about what is it that animates those conversations that's innate in all of us, so that we can deeper understand and solve the problems that face us. We're living in a really strange time, and it requires really big solutions. And tapping into all of our creativity, to pretend that it's like that in the realm of the arts, is sort of, I think it's a missed opportunity.
Well, yeah, and part of that is the nature of culture that views art as something that's
other,
objectified. That, and I don't mean anything negative by that, mm-hmm. but that art is something that gets created. It hangs on a wall, or it sits in a plaza, or it whatever. It's something that someone creates, and there are the people who do that.
Right.
Especially those who are good at that. And then there are the people who don't do that, but that can appreciate that. And when we're appreciating that, we're, having an experience about that, but it's not really part of everyday life. And
right.
it's a something, and it has its own label and whatever. And I've met and gotten to know enough people of more directly indigenous culture, that learn, it also seems common to more indigenous cultures that they don't really have a separate word and a reference point for art. It is very much woven into and of culture and so forth. There may be those who are more seen as and experienced as the ones who are I don't know, designated is maybe not exactly the right word, but the ones who are the most prominent, or the leaders, or those who are the bigger expression of that. But that the creative and putting that into various forms, that's just part of life, and we're all part of that, and we are that, and it's how we came to be. And I'm remembering a lovely Dene man that many years ago, I had a period of time where I was doing a lot, kind of a career change of outdoor experiential education, facilitation, ropes course, and that sort of thing. And I worked at the Santa Fe Mountain Center for some period of time with that, and one of the men I worked with was this wonderful Dene man, and we would have conversations, and we were working a lot also with indigenous youth from various pueblos, and had this conversation that kind of organically came up around, native and indigenous and so forth, and and I could tell, kind of like you were describing, that I was both fascinated but a little uncomfortable, like I didn't have that access. One time he kind of looked at me, he said, Mark, everyone is indigenous to somewhere. It was one of those kind of drop the mic moments. It's like, oh, if there really is no other, there is no other. We are really all one. There may be those who have stayed through their circumstances more directly connected to their, shall we say, original culture, and others have, in the way humans have moved around the world and, formed civilizations in other places, have, stepped away, and maybe cultures become derivative, shall we say, in those ways.
Well, one of the things I love so much about what Rose said is when she attributed credit to her mother and aunt and father, she also acknowledged that not everybody has the privilege of that lineage connection.
Yes.
And she wasn't just referring to the fact that they were artists. She was referring to the fact that she had parents at all, and that she had a deep connection with her parents. And I think that then when you talk about that we're all indigenous to somewhere, and then whatever the way our people rolled, those, and the way we live in our culture now, it gets fragmented. And so not everybody does have a connection to their ancestry, or even their mother and father. I lost my parents when I was very, very young. So when I'm listening to people who get influenced by their family or feel family connection, there's a resonance to that is very, it has a real quality to it.
Yes.
That I recognize.
Yes.
And I'm always curious, I can almost see in artists' work when I look at it or when I talk to them, where are they, what's their lineage? And I don't mean what's their cultural lineage. I mean, like, who were they influenced by? Who have they taken on as their mother, father, energy source?
And their creative exploration and so forth.
Yeah, and it's all kind of a family and a connection and a journey. So I think, we live in a time where we talk a lot about culture, and there's a very important conversation happening about diversity and all of that. But when you get above that to humanity, and I love listening to somebody talking about human and being, because we're both human, which is the particle part of ourself, and being, which is this sort of, if you want to think of it in physics terms, the wave part of ourselves. And we are coexisting as both particle and wave. And the wave, I think of as sort of artistic expression. And the particle is the vehicle through which that gets expressed. And that's sort of the common denominator among all the people that I've been having conversations with, whether they're dancers, whether they're potters or sculptors or painters. That's the common thread.
Yeah, one of the references you gave me in coming to be here with me today was in reference to Arts Club, Santa Fe Arts Club.
Yeah.
That was something you were involved in a few years ago, not a long, long time ago, but in creating and cultivating, and that has continued to flourish, it sounds like.
Yeah, I started that. That was an idea, actually. In 2019, I was in London, and I went to the Chelsea Arts Club in London, and that was started by James Abbott McNeill Whistler, who is a very well-known painter of his era, and he started an arts club, and it was really sort of a debauchered kind of place, where all the artists would come after the studio and just hang out. And
I can picture
it.
Yeah.
And it was a brick and mortar, and it's got beautiful gardens, and it still actually has the same table in the back garden that Whistler set up there. And they would share meals, and there were rooms upstairs, and I guess if they were couldn't go home, they would sleep upstairs. But they also then developed reciprocal relationships with all the arts clubs around the world. And I thought Santa Fe needs one of those. And so I came back from that experience and thought, I'm going to start a Santa Fe Arts Club. Brick and mortar is what I was thinking, with dining club and rooms and the whole 9 yards. Well, then COVID happened. So obviously that wasn't going to happen anytime soon. But I started the platform, a social media platform of that. And it was to address the hunger that we all, or the disaster of being isolated, and what artists really need is connection. And so as a connecting effort, I thought, I'll just start this as a private Facebook page, a private group.
Yes.
And it swelled to 2,000 people really quickly. And so it went beyond the borders of Santa Fe and all over. And it's the nice thing about the Facebook page is that other artists can just post their work whenever they want to and start discussion groups. And so it's a really great way for people to connect with no barrier to entry. There are no requirements. There's no fees or dues to pay. You just show up. So it's really cool that way, and it's been amazingly successful.
You don't have to justify your existence there by a portfolio or what you've accomplished or
nope. And you can be from any art form. If you consider yourself an artist, you're welcome there. And so we have a huge variety, but a lot of, people sort of self-select because they get shy, and so only the people who show their work a lot tend to be pretty established artists. But, we have newcomers that are enthusiastic and excited to show their work, and they get great feedback. People are so kind. There's this idea that in the art world that it's really intimidating. And a lot of people are even intimidated to cross the threshold of a gallery. Another reason that I wanted to start Art Bridge was because I found that a lot of people, would peek through the windows of the gallery and not actually come in, because the assumption is that if you're in there, you have to buy something or you have to understand what you're looking at. And if you feel uncomfortable about that, you don't know. But really the whole purpose of a gallery is to share the art. It's supposed to be a community experience. And I don't know that a lot of people understand that. So, we go to music venues and we don't feel like we have to have a PhD to go to the opera or to go to a concert. But
true. But
something about galleries has
Well, I would think as a musician myself, I'd say what sort of fits into that conversation is the sense of, like I think of one of my favorite T-shirts is, I don't play guitar because I'm good at it.
That's awesome.
We want to participate in that. How many out there are artists who do create art, but they don't put it out in the world at all? They do it for themselves, or maybe to share it with their family, or something like that. And for some, that might be the appropriate choice. For others, it might be, well, I'm not doing that because I'm a little intimidated by it. To be a performing musician has sort of a similar feel to it. It's like, even if I'm playing at home, singing, whatever I'm doing, and somebody tells me, oh, you're good, why don't you go, I'm like, oh, I couldn't go out and perform for anyone. I couldn't. It's like public speaking. As a hypnotherapist, I'm aware, like in all the studies on fears, the number one always over and over again is public speaking, fear of public speaking. But I go, add singing to that, and I'll bet that's like the portion of that that's even above that. To go out and in the moment express your art, your creative.
Well, it's about vulnerability,
with
right?
an audience, and be in the position to get that immediate feedback. It's kind of reasonable in a way that it's intimidating, but it also reflects something cultural about how art and creative expression is part of our culture, and sometimes to some degree isn't as much a part of our culture as really reflects what that creative source and the access to that is really about for us.
I think sometimes we've lost that. I was listening to something the other day where somebody was talking about how the corporate workplace got to be so regimented and like a mistake, a a zone where it's scary to make a mistake, like you can't make a mistake, instead of a co-creation that you do with your peers.
Yes.
And apparently that came from kind of, people post-military being appointed to roles in the marketplace, and then kind of taking that military where mistakes are dangerous. You don't want to make a mistake with your platoon. And so this whole kind of war mentality got superimposed, or so it was, proposed onto the marketplace. And then everybody suddenly had to fall in. And you think of that, the regiment and, these teams and it being top down. And there are a lot of very progressive companies now that are trying to break through that top down way of thinking and just get into collaborative teamwork and self-expression and freeing the individual to co-create with their other team workers, and all the work that I'm sure you did with part of your ropes courses and with hypnotherapy and a lot of the traditions that come that to kind of break down the barriers of self-expression so you can engage again.
Yeah,
and art is definitely one of those things. I mean, they bring it into workshops, into the workplace to kind of like help people break through, drawing with their opposite hand or whatever it is, just to make people less fearful about making a mistake or showing themselves, revealing who they really are.
Yeah, and when that can be done in a way that addresses where the power for enhancing an organization really lies, I think those who study that sort of thing statistically, something like 70% or more of the problems that exist in organizations typically come from the systems that are in place. And I would just say, well, the systems are also part of a reflection of the culture. But so system and culture is where the vast majority of problems are influenced out, where they come out of. And yet, vast majority of the time, it's individuals that get blamed for them. And that's kind of a big meme, maybe more so than ever before, it seems to me, in our culture, is that there's this exaggerated personal blaming that comes up, whether it's in politics, whether it's in the running of organizations, sometimes even in families and communities. Where,
so there's a scapegoat.
There's something about that, and you could get into a whole thing about why that is or what that's about. But just sit back and just go, okay, that's a thing that goes on. A guest I just had recently, Rebecca Costa, who wrote a best-selling book, Watchman's Rattle. She speaks to these memes and what she calls super memes in culture, where there's just this automatic tendency in certain things that overrides the opportunity to just be present in the moment with something, make an appropriate choice that fits with that. And that's one of those, this automatic, exaggerated personal blaming about things. Well, how are people going to be willing to innovatively try things on, especially when you get in the realm of public policy or corporate policy or so forth? If I make a mistake, then I get blamed and punished for it.
Right. Well, and I'll tell you, it's interesting because the client base that I work with were, prior to doing this, I was doing art travel, geared at women who were empty nesters and people who were transitioning from that workforce that you just described.
Yes. And
it's really, really hard to wake up in the morning after you've left your 9-to-5 corporate job, or you've left whatever your role is as a parent, and you're making sure you have to get it right. And then you're staring down this new life that you're trying to create. And you're still in this mindset of, how do I do it right? And there's no roadmap for it. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to do the things that I'm doing now is to give people a new kind of roadmap of like, what's it like to wake up every morning and self-generate and create your day from scratch, or create your week or your month or your, and setting intention. That's not how we roll in those big memes. It's not about let's set an intention and co-create the manifestation of it. It's getting it right. And so having to undo all that programming and learning and get people to a fresh start and a beginner's mind, which is so helpful if you're trying to forge a new path in your life.
So I'm going to take full advantage of this perfect segue opportunity. We're going to step into that even more when we come back from this very brief break here. We will be back in a minute here on A Matter of the Mind Project Connection. We're back on A Matter of the Mind. I'm Mark Perry. I'm here today with Lili Pierrepont, who, among other things, was one of the founding, influences with Santa Fe Art Club, and among other things now is creating a podcast that, as you've told me a little about it, you both have some clear intention about what it will be, but you also have some kind of open, I'm not quite sure I have some idea and sense. So really a creative, something that's kind of like this is evolving, episode by episode and moment by moment. And so from where we just left off in terms of, this lack of familiarity for so many of us in having a free agency to actually, what's it like if you had no have-tos, if you had no, can'ts involved, and if consideration of resource were not the consideration we sometimes exaggerate for ourselves. How do you talk about, you talk about Arts Club, that a gathering place for the sharing of creative ideas that inspire and nourish, I love this phrase, the hunger for beauty, harmony, and peace in the world. It's easy to say a phrase like that and have that just kind of flow by, but when you really pause, what are those? Beauty, harmony, peace in the world, connection, I use that word a lot, and connectedness. But to be in the direct experience of that and be in that agency of, okay, I'm in charge of me and my life, and here we go, and what do I really want to do and really want to create into, even if I don't think of myself as creative or as an artist or having that kind of access, but here's Lili, and she's saying, well, maybe I do, and what about that? How do you talk and invite people into that conversation and that envisioning?
Well, that's a great question, and it's interesting to be on the other side of this equation where you're doing the questions and I'm coming up with the answers.
Yes.
But my intention there is to reveal that the people with whom I'm having these conversations that are creatives from all different disciplines, mm-hmm. is that they're just regular people who get up every morning and think, what am I going to do today? Mm-hmm. And just by having the conversation that, starts with something as simple as like, how do you envision, what's your routine? How do you start your day? You walk the dog, and then what happens? You walk into your studio, your recording, studio, whatever your medium is, and like, how do you start your day? And just getting a sense of what somebody who we have as this sort of big Wizard of Oz magician who just creates out of nothing, that they're just regular folks, and that a lot of them are people who have shown up every single day to practice over and over and over again, whatever their instrument is, whether it's an actual physical instrument or whether it's a paintbrush or whether it's a pen or typewriter or whatever it is. But I think a lot of it is just showing up. And so getting people to the showing up, and then comes the really big jump. I think it's the big jump, because artists who show up every day get so accustomed to attuning to, let's just call it the field, with that thing that they enter into, that then comes through them. They say it as if it's like, because for them it's something that they've just gotten so in the habit of doing that they just trust that it will happen. And so one of my questions that I ask is like, what happens when that doesn't happen? And so far, almost everybody that I've spoken to hasn't ever hit one of those bumps in the road. They sometimes get curious about their technique and like, what would it be like to introduce something new to the game? But in terms of their access to the source of information coming through, mm-hmm. that's done. And they don't have a destination. They just let it come. And then I say, well, how do you know when it's finished? Like, does the field tell you it's done? And they talk about how they engage with the canvas or with the piece of art that they're working on.
Yes.
And the conversation that ensues. So all that to say is that if you take that back to the person who's transitioning from a life that they had that was very organized and structured and required them to show up and be organized in a certain way, and now all of a sudden it's just the big wide open. Tom Petty talks about the great wide open.
Yes, the great wide open, yeah.
And that's a thing. It's a thing, and it can be terrifying.
Yes.
If you have no relationship with this thing we called the field. But I would argue that we all do have some experience with that, but we just have to maybe get a little bit more surrender to something that we already know. And there are lots of different ways people do that. And sometimes it's a yoga class, or sometimes it's going for a run, or whatever it is. But we've all had that experience of being in the flow. Athletes talk about it. And
yes.
And it's really no different, I don't think, than being in the flow. It's just without the expectation. And letting go of that, I guess, can be a little intimidating. So I think that the purpose of the conversations is to just show as many different variations on how people access that field.
Yes.
And what their
Yes.
experience of accessing that field feels like in their body, or what it feels like, or where do they get their inspiration? Does it come from a song that they're listening to? Does it come from looking at the sky? Does it come from interacting with their dog? Does it come from a conversation they had with their spouse? Where are the possible entry points? And I find that fascinating.
So I hear, as you're speaking to that, I hear in that what's essential in that is the willingness to be present and observe whatever's showing up, even if it's in a context that may not seem like what you're describing. It's easy to look at in terms of, you're talking about artists. So those are people who have already chosen to practice and explore and be actively engaged in whatever their form of art is, and yet all kind of speak to. I've had the same kind of experience with working with clients who are creatives and artists, and I always put big air quotes around the creatives and artists because that implies that others aren't, and that's part of what I've learned. Man, we so all are, if we're willing and if we have some access to some guiding resource, because especially if you're someone, as you describe, who maybe didn't have parents, or parents left earlier, parents were abusive or neglectful, or you grew up in a community where everybody is poor and just scraping to get by and so forth. The idea of creative and art can seem like, at best, a great luxury, if not a big distraction from what's really most important to take care of. And that's totally reasonable for someone who's had whatever experience of life and background kind of fits with that description, have that. And then maybe something happens. You cross paths with somebody who becomes that possible wake-up call, or even a mentor, or an exposure to something, and just kind of go, oh, what's going on here? That can be a gift in life if that actually happens. So there's that. But in that, there's always this availability to just be like, what's actually present here?
Yeah, most of the people I talk to, there's an intersection between spirituality and art.
Yes.
And I think that sometimes the language, especially the language we use now in terms of like the field or letting spirit come through or whatever.
Creative source.
All of that.
Yeah.
I think it's we sometimes overlook the fact that being present is in and of itself an artistic and spiritual experience.
Absolutely, yes.
And then there's what do we do with it?
Yes.
But I think the more important thing is just tapping into it. And I'm sure you've heard, and I think I quote her every time I open my mouth, but Elizabeth Gilbert has written a book called Big Magic. And one of the key premises that I get from that book is that creativity unexpressed becomes toxic. And so I think we're all meant to express our own creative voice, whatever that is. And if we try to suppress it, or if it gets suppressed, it can be, it can cause problems.
Yeah.
It can show up as, physiological illness, mental illness. It can show up in all manner of ways. And I think it's because we are inherently creative beings. Again, it's that human being where the beingness of us is innately creative.
Well, it's kind of like the idea, we take nourishment into our bodies, and we all know that what we put in our bodies is only part of that process. What we expel from our bodies, just like every other living organism, is part of the process too. Well, if you have a problem with the expelling, then that screws up the whole process of being available to the nourishment and so forth.
Exactly.
And I also love how she talks about that, at best, even if it's doesn't turn out to really have some big toxic effect, it's almost like, you think about that idea of the muse, of the creative showing up. It's like, if you aren't willing to be attentive and available and do something with that, how often have people kind of gone, something shows up as in some innovation in business or some art, or somebody makes a movie, whatever it is, and writes a song, whatever, and they go, well, that was my idea. I thought I even had, it's like the story got written, and it's exactly what I wanted to write. It's like, and she had this, it's like kind of like the muse is, flowing around here looking for opportunities for expression. And if you're not willing and available, okay, it'll hang out for a little while maybe, and then it's going to move on. And that gives a little bit of a negative twist on it. But the point of that to me is that creative, that muse, that something, it is in every moment showing up. Something is showing up, happening, and
are you going to be attentive to it?
Are you going to be attentive?
Yeah.
Are you going to be, what if, I love to look at humanity as like one organism. Mm-hmm. But even if that's an accurate description, there's all these cells, however many, 8 billion of us at this point. And there's a uniqueness in each individual cell of this human organism. And how come? How come there's this uniqueness? How come there is natural diversity going on that, as you described, we can observe? And if we observe enough of the diversity, we start to notice the common themes and what's essential and fundamental and shared and that's showing up over and over again. There's something about that that's natural and organic that we don't really have to think real hard at or work very hard at. We have tendencies about that, but we don't have to. What if it's, we can just practice by starting like, what's it like to actually be really present in the moment and just observe what's actually present here? What's showing up here?
One of the big defeating conversations that can happen is like, that story's already been told. Like, what is it that I have to bring to anything that is significant enough that I would open my mouth or raise my paintbrush or, dare swing out? And I think, that's valid from a fear perspective.
Yes.
But the thing I love about what she talks about in the context of the muse is if your story is meant to be told by you only. There's only one story that can be told by you. There's a great Martha Graham quote that I would totally mess up if I tried to, but there's that life force, that quickening that wants to come through you.
Yes.
And if you don't do it, it will never happen. And you're the only one who can do it, and it's only yours. So you're either going to deprive the world of it, or you're going to give it back to the world, which is from whence it came anyway. So there's that metabolic process that you were talking about a lot, where you're just participating in the never-ending circle of life, which is what artists show up to do every day.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons I like to be around them, is that they're really great role models for that.
Yeah. And and I would guess, I think you've probably talked to far more artists than I have. I don't know if that's true, but I'm guessing that may be true. But in that, it makes sense to me that there's going to be a recurring theme of the kind of dance, or maybe sometimes more like a wrestling match, between just being present with the creative that's flowing through and being fully in that experience and whatever expression goes with that. And all of the ideas that come in about, well, if I'm creating something, it has to be significant. And what does that mean? What is significant? And yet so many artists have expressed to me, when I'm really in it, I ask them, does it really ultimately, I mean, if you could be in that kind of experience of life coming into being moment by moment, if you could really be in that all the time, which that's a stretch, the all the time idea, but if you could be, would it really matter exactly what the details end up being, what the circumstance, what the outcome, whatever? And I have just gotten this universal response for this, no. No, actually, if I could be, it's like the significance is in the moment of it.
Yeah. I mean, everybody I've spoken to has agreed that, if you get too precious about it, you're missing the moment.
Yeah.
Now that's not to say that if you're a skilled technician, you don't know, you're not grappling with when is something done, or am I expressing, is this coming through in the way that I want to. I mean, there's some kind of dance that needs to be engaged with there between. But that's mastery is when you really can get out of the way.
Yeah.
And let it come.
Yeah, certainly technique and knowledge of tools and resources and whatever is part of what can give a full access.
Yeah.
Went and saw Joe Bonamassa recently, who is, just a maestro, but in a blues, rock and blues kind of context of guitar and singing and expressing what that genre is about, and surrounds himself with other virtuoso musicians. And you get that much virtuosity on a stage, it's inevitable at some point in the performance, something's going to show up, and did that night. Where you just you just kind of lose touch with it. You're an audience member being entertained by someone is there is something present here, and everybody is in it.
Yeah, I think we've all had that experience as an audience member, and I just had a really challenging experience. I went to an ensemble, a chamber music ensemble, and it was Burtok. That's really challenging music, and it's not a genre that I'm familiar with at all. Very discordant, and it took me I was at a 3-hour concert, and by the second or the third, I don't know what you would call it, the third segment of it, I was so inside the music that, like you're just describing, I completely forgot that I was sitting in a chair in the audience. I was just literally being carried on these very discordant, very, to my ear, unfamiliar notes. And I'm thinking, the first part of the concert, I had to be this is really unfamiliar. This is reminding me of what it must be like to be somebody walking into a gallery looking at abstract art that they can't make heads or tails of. And I got to be that beginner's mind. So I just sort of I just sat there and I let go and I let it wash over me. And then I was in that zone, that fabulous place. So that's eternal. So
that's a wonderful reminder, essential piece, that phrase of beginner's mind, should we say the willing beginner's mind, the available beginner's mind. Because I'm picturing, being in that abstract gallery where, for whatever reason, there's one particular something or one particular moment, or maybe you've hung out there for a while or something else, and there's just one where you kind of go, oh, I get this. I don't really know what it is I'm getting. I still don't know what's but that sense of, to use a Heinlein term that I've always loved, to grok what that is in the moment, there's something in that, and I imagine, so what would it be like in the world as we go, I'm always looking for what can we draw from this in terms of what we're living into in the world, what we're all living into in the world, that we could draw from and actually apply to have an influence more in the direction of connectedness than where we're at right now. And of course, that's easiest to do with those we already know or have some sense of affiliation with or agreement with or whatever. But what about those people? Those ones that you believe that, you could do that, whatever. What would it be like to be able to bring that kind of open beginner's mind into that realm as well, into that possibility of conversation, of relationship? It's all This is one of the most common things I've heard, both from creative, from artists, from different people, and very much centrally common among indigenous people is like everything is relationship.
Yeah.
Everything is relationship. So it's not like there isn't relationship going on. It's all about what's the quality of it, what's present in this relationship, what's available, what's possible, and if we could bring that really open beginner's mind into even the most like I don't know that I can even be in the vicinity of people who believe or act like that. If I could even bring that there, if more and more of us were willing to at least try that on.
Yeah. Well, it's about getting curious, and it's about softening our focus. We get so trained to know the answer and to have a particular point of view that we can defend and back up.
Yes.
The willingness to not know, and it is sort of, I think, one of the bridges to that. And there's a wonderful organization that I know about called Braver Angels that teaches people how to have conversations across the divide. Across the political divide, across religious divide, across whatever the divide is. And one of the methods that they use is to take two people who have similar circumstances, a mom, 3 kids at home, whatever. They're on polar opposite sides of, or so they think, until they start comparing notes on what it's like, on the things that they have in common.
Yes.
And first the bridge starts getting built with all the things that they have in common. And then once the rapport has been so firmly established, they start, through a scripted kind of exchange of questions, they start to get insight into the mindset of the other and realize, they no longer have this other kind of experience. And so that it's an organization that's training people how to have those kinds of conversations. And in a way, what you're doing is training people how to have those kinds of conversations. And what I hope my project is doing is training people to have those kinds of conversations, just softening the focus, spending a moment outside of your comfort zone, and just getting curious about what's it like over there.
Yes.
Before jumping to any conclusions or needing to know anything.
Yeah, step into the possibility of, inquiry is so simple and yet so powerful.
Yeah.
And can be at the same time so challenging for us, especially our Western culture kind of, mind training, which is if I'm in inquiry, if I'm questioning something, it's to get to an answer.
Yeah.
It's to get to a solution. It's to know what's right.
Right.
Yeah, that's a big one, right?
Right.
To be right and defend what's right. Oh my God, how much has gone wrong from the position of defending what's right and what I know and so forth. But the moment we're in real open inquiry, you can't really hold open inquiry and be in defending what's right at the same time.
Yeah.
We're not wired that way.
Yeah, and it's weird that we have these boundaries of where right becomes wrong.
Right, wrong, yes.
and even if I was just thinking as you were talking about, the people who I experience who travel a great deal, the more they travel, the more their sense of boundarylessness. Now there are beautiful boundaries that are kind of prescribed by culture and language, food, that kind of thing. But as soon as you get into these, there's another way that boundaries get enforced that's just weird. And how did those boundaries come to be there? I mean, I understand boundaries that are created by mountains or bodies of water or separations of land and water, but there's like this whole concept of boundaries that came from somewhere, and maybe colonization or all those things that kind of have gotten us really confused. And then we take these boundaries and we turn them into ideas, boundary ideas, and then we impose those ideas on other people, and then things go bad.
Yeah, as you say that, I get reminded, that we're all wired with the primal survival sensibilities that have been passed on to us by thousands of generations of humans before us. The ones who survived and passed on their genes. Right. What worked to survive and pass on the genes, that's us.
Yeah.
We're the ones who have that, and that's powerful intelligence. It has its own boundaries. It has its own way of looking at things. It's in all of us. So that's part where I go, okay, what what if there really are no, what if I could pick, the most annoying or even offensive people out there in the world and go, those, and go, you know what, I'm the same as them.
Right.
One of my brothers, I have 4 brothers, one of my brothers kind of got really into the family history and had to look into all of that stuff. And some of it is very wonderfully uplifting and so forth. Oh, there's this cool ancestor. We had like a great-grandfather, whatever, did something amazing, whatever. But he came across somebody on my dad's side who was a captain in the Confederate Army and was one of the big activists in promoting slavery. And I'm going like, okay, he's part of me as well. So it's kind of like, all that you can witness, whether it's uplifting and inspiring or with somebody who seems like offensive and dangerous, you can kind of know, what if that's in me as well? But there's choice available in that.
Well, and I think one of the things that the world becoming so small now that we're getting, this is going to sound kind of woo-woo maybe, but, we're also all terrestrial earthlings. And if you open up the lens even wider,
yes.
It's like we can't escape the fact that we're earthlings. And if we're going to have a conversation about territory and boundaries, and we're talking about the larger, universe, that gets to be an interesting conversation.
Yes.
So
yes.
How do we identify as earthlings instead of as, this country or that country?
Yes. Yes.
And I think when you're tapping into the field, you can't help but get curious about things that go beyond just the land and the stars, like that.
Yes, and that how when we look at what are the biggest problems that humanity is facing, you really see, well, they're problems because of how humanity operates as a whole, as an organism. And if we can't or won't get in touch with humanity as an organism, and what are the blind spots and the limitations and the distractions and tendencies, then how are those big ones ever going to get solved, right, or shifted? But the moment that that's where I look at, okay, what if humanity could actually operate as one organism, how would that be? There has to be an essential nature of connectedness, of interaction, kind of like in one human body. There are all these cells. You don't typically, maybe that's what cancer is some cells that go, oh, I'm not like those over there. I'm going to do my own thing here and just grow like crazy. What if, that's kind of what that is.
And sometimes we don't behave in a cooperative way until there is that external threat.
Right.
And so
right.
I hope it's not going to take the external threat for us to figure it out.
Right. Right.
But the nice thing about engaging with artists is that you get to try on trippy concepts like that, because they are thinking about that. They are on that leading edge of, outside of the things that I've ever considered. And so yet another reason to kind of dance in that, in that space.
So we just have a couple of minutes left. Anything in particular you want the audience to know about you or contacting you or anything else going on that you are inviting them to?
Well, Kali, so ArtStorming, which is the podcast, that's our first project out of ArtBridge. Mm-hmm. ArtStorming is in its first season. We're calling it City Different because I started focusing with the people in my community that I'm connected to. And so the first 16 podcasts are about Santa Fe artists. I'm continuing the season and we'll be continuing to speak with more Santa Fe artists and New Mexico artists. So that season's going to continue through April of 2025, which will bring us to a full year of City Different. And you can find us on Spotify or I guess it's Apple Podcast.
Apple Podcast. Uh-huh.
And then also at artstorming.org. All the episodes are there. And there are 4 more coming soon. So stay tuned.
Wonderful. So as we're going out here, I'll just invite you all, us all, as we always do, to let yourself just take a moment to be present. Let all the details of whatever we talked about do what they do. Kind of like with poetry. Just let the feel and the presence of it be with you and notice what's percolating for you in that, what's present for you in that. And especially if there's any inclination to do something, to lean a certain way, to, who you could be in the world. What would it be like to lean more into that and do something with that? What would that really be like? Who would you be having more of that be flowing and expressed in your life? And what if that is a way simply that you can speak to as a matter of the mind?
Love
Blessings.
That. Love that.